Good day to you. In a moment I'm going to ask you to pause the video and take a look at something. So get your fingers ready. Okay, you ready? I want you to pause the video right after I'm done here explaining what to look for, and I want you to check the tag on your shirt or your pants or your skirt or some article of clothing that you're wearing. I want you to look at the tag and figure out what country that piece of clothing was made in. All right, you ready? Go. All right, now that you're back, where was your piece of clothing made? Was it Bangladesh? Was it China? Was it Pakistan? I'm pretty sure it was not the United States. I'm pretty sure it was not Canada. It might have been Mexico, though. Why is that? Why is your clothing that you're wearing made somewhere else? Well, it's because of a phenomenon that's going on all across the world called globalization. It's not a new phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that's been happening since really the beginning of time, but it's just really accelerated right now because of technology. And basically what globalization is the idea of the world is coming closer together. The peoples, the countries, the governments, the industries, and the media are coming closer together because we can. We can buy things from across the world. Even this bowl of fruit right here probably has oranges in it from Spain. Now, how could that be? An orange that needs to be eaten with just a few days of picking it is probably being picked all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, 6.5 hours by plane flight. And these avocados here may be coming from Mexico. It's because of globalization. It's because the transportation systems that can move these products around the world are much faster and more efficient. It's because people are actually aware of other products in other countries that they can get a hold of as being more within their desire. And it's because, let's face it, people want to pay less for products, and a lot of these products can be made for a cheaper cost in other countries. So that's what this chapter is all about. It's about globalization, but it speaks about globalization amongst media. And globalization is really a worldwide climate that we're living in. As I mentioned, it's not a new phenomenon, globalization. In fact, one of the first forms of globalization, or at least one of the first forms of massive globalization, is a very unflattering form, and it was slavery. You can look at slavery as a form of globalization because the Europeans would sail to the African continent and they would select and imprison and purchase African slaves. And then they would take those slaves to the Caribbean and they would offload those slaves onto plantations in the Caribbean and also to the United States, to cotton farms, to sugar farms, to coffee farms, to banana farms, plantations. And then once the slaves were offloaded, then the products that were made in these locations, the cotton, which made up clothes and textiles, like the shirt that I'm wearing, and the sugar and the molasses and the rum, they would all be then put on the ships and sailed over to Europe again, where the whole process would start all over again. It was called the triangle, the slave triangle. It's an early form of globalization. Here in the 21st century, though, globalization refers to many different products going around the world, but in terms of media, it's the idea that when you watch a TV show, when you listen to a song on the radio, when you read a newspaper, if you do read a newspaper, a magazine, or watch a film, where is that film originating from? Where is the idea originating from? Where is the format of what you are watching originating from? That's what globalization is all about. And mainly what's driving globalization, at least accelerating it so fast, is corporate profit making. And I use the word promiscuous, the promiscuity of corporate profit making. I use that word in my book. I meant to use it because it really means that there's a kind of lustful desire on the part of corporations to expand their markets. If you look at the Mexicans and how much they like NFL football games, they like them so much that Mexican programmers can actually play those football games inside of movie theaters, and people will leave their homes and come into a movie theater so that they can watch NFL football. Why is that? It's because the people who program NFL football know that they're going to reach a maximum audience here in the United States. There are people in this class, comparative media, that will not watch a single football game all season long, except for maybe the Super Bowl, which becomes more about advertisements in a way, and pageantry and the celebration of the American dream, than it does about football. And it speaks to the idea that certain media products will reach a ceiling, and they cannot go any further within the country that they're being distributed. So corporations are reaching for other places to distribute those products. The presidential election campaign is full of talk about globalization. You'll find that both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, and if you look at the third-party candidates, Gary Johnson and Jill Stein, they're talking about trade agreements that the United States is in, and they're going to take positions on those trade agreements. And the trade agreements being good or bad is what they're going to be talking about. And the people who tend to be against the trade agreements tend to be against them because it's resulting in a loss of American jobs. The people who are in favor of those trade agreements tend to be in favor of them because they bring new products and new ideas into the United States, and they actually argue that the trade agreements create American jobs in the long run. That's for you to decide in the presidential election, but it's all speaking to what's driving globalization, which is corporate profit making, looking elsewhere for markets. Now, what are some of the four main factors beneath this umbrella of corporate profit making that are driving globalization? Well, one of them is international travel is much easier today. It's easy for you to book your own trip. I'm looking at taking my class, this class, which I'm teaching next summer, and I'm hopefully going to be teaching it in Sweden. And I was doing all my research on my own this weekend. I was looking at the airlines that fly from Newark to Sweden. And there's two of them that I'm looking at. I'm looking at American Airlines, and I'm also looking at United Airlines. And then there's a third one that came into the picture as I was researching it too, called Icelandic Airways. Now, it may be tough for you to envision this because you've grown up where you can use the internet for this task, but 20 years ago, I would be going to a travel agent, and the travel agent would be making the arrangements for me, as well as taking a cut of the cost. And so that's not the case today. You can book your own travel. Secondly, just the volume of airplanes that are traveling across the world has increased, and the speed has gotten faster, and so you can get to your destination faster because of the increased volume of airplane travel. So international travel is much easier today. And yet, as we found out in this class, there are many of you who say that you want to go, oh, I've always wanted to go to Italy. I'm going to get there someday. Australia would be a cool place to go. There is something also that holds us as Americans back. We tend to be averse to risk when we travel, in part because we've kind of come to understand the rest of the world as being scary. Mexico is full of drug cartel violence, and yet, as one student in this class commented, they seem to be the only person who hasn't been to Mexico because so many people are going to Mexico. I'm glad to see that perception of Mexico, created largely through the media, is being overcome. It's one of the reasons that Americans don't travel. We're kind of afraid of the rest of the world. And so when we travel, we want to do it in a really safely contained experience. So we go on a cruise, which lets us off onto an island for a couple hours, and then we get back on this big safe boat and sail to the next destination. As opposed to just booking a flight, trying to find a hotel on the internet, camping, youth hosteling, deciding where you're going to stay once you get there, deciding where you're going to eat, all that stuff, that takes risk. And we're taught to be averse to that in the United States. Also in the United States, our geography does not lend itself that well to traveling to other countries. The closest country is Canada, at least to us here in the northeast of Pennsylvania, only 7 hours away. And yet people still will choose to drive all the way to Disney in Florida, which is a much longer drive, rather than go to Canada because of that slight fear about what foreign countries are like. So that's a little sidebar about the United States and why so many Americans end up not traveling despite the fact that they really want to travel. All right, let's get back to the factors now. The second factor that's influencing globalization is communication technologies. We've seen the computer and the internet, first of all, with different ways of communicating with each other through social media platforms, Facebook, also email, joining blogs, putting your name on a listserv, a regular email that comes out from someplace. These are ways that we have gotten to communicate with other parts of the world. But really, having the phone do that for us now is really making it easy for us to talk to people in other parts of the world and find out what other parts of the world are like. It's so easy today for students to say, oh, I can find out the answer. What is the capital of the Philippines that's in the news? I'll just go on Google and type it in. I've got it in like 30 seconds or less. And so using our technologies today is another reason that the world is coming closer together. We call the revolutions that happened in Egypt a couple years ago and happened also in Libya, we call those internet or even Facebook revolutions. Because if Facebook and the internet was not available to the people within those countries learning about the ideas of protesting and about how democracy works, then they would not have fomented the rebellion that overthrew those governments. Next up, under factors that are influencing globalization, you have the global media conglomerate, the rise of this mammoth entity. It's a corporation, yes, but it's really much more than that, because it's really an umbrella organization or a parent organization that has many different divisions. And my book is somewhat out of date now, but still you can get an idea by reading the material in this section that there are some really big heavyweights out there, big companies that are having lots of divisions, which are controlling many media properties that are reaching into your eyeballs and your ears every single day, perhaps without you even realizing. I'm talking about Disney, for example. Maybe you're not a big Disney person, but you might be a big ESPN person. You might watch a lot of ESPN sports. Or you might be a news person and watch ABC News. Or you might be a person who watches a sitcom or a drama on television that's on ABC. Guess what? All part of the same company, Disney. Disney is one of the huge global media conglomerates. And they have lots of properties outside of just media as well, like their theme parks, for example. There are other ones in the chapter too, which you should acquaint yourself with. The News Corporation is one of them. The News Corporation owns Fox. It owns the Wall Street Journal. It owns several film production studios. It's a big company. One of the companies you may not have known about is the Bertelsmann Company. Now, the Bertelsmann Company is an interesting company in terms of illustrating a concept for this class. It's a German company, and it came up with the idea for a TV show on its British TV station. It has a British TV station, or ownership in one, called Channel 5. That's the name of it. It would be kind of like considering an NBC, for example, in the US. And its idea, the Bertelsmann Company, was to have a show where singing contestants could compete against each other and become the winner. And they named this show Pop Idol. Yeah, now it's sounding familiar, right? Because later Fox, completely different company, subdivision of the News Corporation, purchased the rights to produce that show here in the United States, calling it American Idol. And in American Idol, it became a different name because in the United States, our cultural values like to have as celebrating American culture and feeling very patriotic and nationalistic. So that became a name that was well suited for that particular program. One of you in this class talked about how you saw the Japanese version of Pop Idol. It's globalization. It's globalization in this particular case through a German company, which you would have never known had you just been watching that show here in the United States. Moving on to the fourth factor influencing globalization, we've got audience curiosity. It's the idea that people today are very curious about what other parts of the world are like, especially when they see exotic shows like Anthony Bourdain's show on CNN, where he travels to other parts of the world and meets with people in their native settings and shares meals with them and drinks beers and talks about philosophy and talks about ways of life. It gets us to feel, wow, that jungle in Thailand looks really cool. That beach in Australia looks like a place I'd want to go. The audience has more curiosity today because of all the other factors that I mentioned, and also just because people have more access to seeing what other countries and other media are like. However, all these good things that we've talked about with globalization are also met with strong criticisms as well. So let's move into those now. The first criticism of globalization is that it is creating a massive homogeneity among media content that's out there. Homogeneity is the idea that things are looking the same all the time. You know, it's really rare to be able to go into any foreign city, even in a place that's radically different, like China, without seeing a McDonald's on the street corner in major cities. It's a homogeneity. And that McDonald's is bringing with it not just the food, but it's bringing with it commercials that are airing. It's bringing with it a certain style and imagery, the golden arches. It's bringing with it a certain way of eating, that you eat quickly, that you order what you want and it gets served quickly, that you order what you want and then you can go back for some more and get that served quickly too if you want it. It's a whole way of life that's being introduced. It's all part of homogeneity, and we can see that in our media content as well. I mean, how many web pages do you go to where if you want to find a phone number, you just know to scroll to the bottom of the page and look for this tiny little word that says contact, and then it tries to get you to email them so that they don't have to devote people resources to talking on a phone, and eventually you'll be able to find a phone number. That's a homogeneity. Why isn't that content link at the top of the page? Why isn't it in the center of the page? Why isn't it you just have the phone number to begin with? It's because corporations are trying to reduce the amount of labor that's expended on speaking to people. They would rather that the customer figure out the problems on their own. It's homogeneity. Same with radio. Radio is so homogeneous now, commercial pop radio across the world. You have the fast-talking DJ. You have the hard-hitting commercials. You have the contests. You have the songs like Adele and Bruno Mars that are played over and over and over and over and over. This is homogeneity. Another criticism has to do with what's known as unfairness and information flow. Unfairness and information flow. This strikes a chord particularly with developing countries, countries that are smaller and poorer than countries like the United States. These countries don't necessarily have the means to produce their own media content, so instead what they have to do is they have to purchase TV shows, they have to purchase outside films, they have to purchase other kinds of media content if they want to keep their stations on the air for 24 hours a day. But what that means is there's an unfairness in the flow of information. Because I would ask you, what's your favorite Costa Rican drama? What kind of Russian documentary do you prefer? When you last saw a Chinese melody drama, what was your impression of the costuming? The answer to all these questions is you're probably drawing a big blank, right? Because you haven't seen any of this. Why? Because it's not flowing into our country. We'll talk about that later when we get to the chapter on imports and exports. But for right now, just please make note that if you were to look at the flow between countries of information through the media, it's not always equal. Kind of like having a friendship where your friend does all the talking, and they talk about themselves all the time, never ask you about yourself. Not very satisfying, is it? Yeah, that's kind of what we're talking about here in terms of a Costa Rica. But also those smaller countries, they are unhappy with how they are represented because often they are not even represented by their own people in the media content that circulates around the world. They are represented by foreign reporters. Reporters from CNN, for example, doing a story on Guatemala. And the Guatemalan people don't have any say in how they are portrayed, and oftentimes they're unhappy with what is chosen to be selected to be aired in the news report. So that's all part of this criticism of unfairness and information flow. And by the way, I invent three terms there. I don't invent one of them, but three terms are used to describe the balance in information. If you are an ethnocentric country, you're a country that's putting out a lot of media and not taking in a lot of media. The U.S. is one of those countries. We'll talk about why more later in the course. If you're an exocentric country, then the media are coming into your country and you're not creating a lot of your own media products, and so the outside world is sort of defining you within your own country. It's an exocentric country. The ideal balance, most people would consider, would be a world-centric country. That's where you have sort of an even amount of media content that's flowing outside of your country and an even amount of media content that's coming into your country. And you can see that when you turn on the TV and go through the channels. A country like England, for example, is fairly world-centric. If you pick up the remote control for a TV in England or Scotland or Wales or Ireland, and you start clicking through the channels, you'll see dozens of American programs every single night. The Walking Dead, I know that it's showing there right now. They're modern programs, and they're programs that fill out a very full slate of American programs. You can also see French programs, in some cases Italian, and other kinds of European programs in Britain. It's more of a world-centric country. Now, what are some of the factors that influence this unfairness in information flow? One is geography. The United States, we have that against us, right? We don't have a lot of countries bordering us where the radio programs are going to spill over into our country. How many of you have even read a Canadian newspaper, even though it's only 7 hours away? We're going to read one when we go to Canada. Odds are you probably can't even name the top 2 newspapers in Canada. Can you? One of them is the Globe and Mail. It's not your fault. It's because those newspapers are not spilling over into our country because we're still so far away from them. Another factor influencing the flow of information is language. We tend to have an exchange of media content with those countries that have the same language as us, and especially here in the U.S. where we don't speak a second language. That's changing, of course. Spanish is probably going to take over by the year 2050, but for right now, most people are saying, I don't need to learn another language. I can get by with English, and fair enough. That's actually true. But it also means you're going to be very less likely to watch a film with subtitles. You're going to be much less likely to go through the web page that I sent around to the class On the CBC, which is in French, of course, because it's in Montreal. Montreal's in Quebec. It's a French-speaking province. So the web page is in French. And how many of you have tried to figure that out? Probably not too many. Language influences how much media content is exchanged. Also, we have cultural and historical ties. Britain and the United States, it's almost like they're next door to each other when you look at how much information is exchanged between the two countries and how often our leaders meet. And that's because we have a long history with each other. We had a revolution against Britain. We have their language. For a while, we were sending taxes to their king. We have a very long and close historical and cultural connection. That's why we get BBC programs over here. That's why we get some British comedies. That's why we have so many British announcers in our news media. Going along with that, we also have trade, we have military relations, and there's religion. In a country like Lebanon, you'll find that religion is a very big factor with what information is exchanged between the neighboring countries of Jordan. Certainly not Israel. Lebanon is at a state of war with Israel, but also they have opposite religions for the most part. If you look at the predominant religion in Lebanon as being Islam, and of course in Israel you have a particular denomination of Christianity, and so that religion blocks some media flowing between the two countries. Which takes us now to the final criticism, back to the criticisms of globalization. The final criticism is cultural imperialism. Now, you've probably heard that word imperialism or imperial powers. It's a country that will invade another country because it can, because it has more military and physical might. So it can force its way into a country and take it over. We saw that with Russia taking over the Crimea, which was formerly a portion of Ukraine, Russian-speaking Ukraine. Beautiful area of the Mediterranean, right there on the Mediterranean Sea. Russia took it over. Big country, bigger than Ukraine. Not getting into whether it was justified or not, just talking about what imperialism is. We see the same thing in media. When we see media invading another country, what we start to see is those values in the smaller country being eroded and going away. If you're from almost anywhere in Latin America, one staple of your diet is rice and beans. Rice and beans, rice and beans. You have it almost every single night, if not every single night, if you're of Latin heritage. Well, guess what? We may not see rice and beans being so commonly served anymore because that's being replaced by the hamburger. Why is it being replaced by the hamburger? Because of the massive flow of American programs with people sitting in diners eating hamburgers, with commercials for McDonald's and Burger King and Wendy's and all the other fast food chains that serve this thing called a hamburger. It's a very small example, but it's the idea that cultural imperialism, also called electronic colonialism, colonialism as in Britain and Spain and the former colonial powers from other countries, mainly in Europe, sending their forces into the United States and to Ghana in our book and to other countries all over the world and setting up their own systems of government and school, etc. That's what's happening also in the media. We have media invading other countries and replacing those values. That's why you have so many people all across the world wearing t-shirts now, because so many people in American media and British media, also Western clothing from British media, is the t-shirt. And then finally, under cultural imperialism, you have production conventions. Production conventions is the way that media are produced and formatted. Early in the class, I talked about how in Britain you have TV shows that are starting at 12:35 in the afternoon. In the United States, we know that at the top of the hour, we can quickly scan several channels and see what program we like. We have like 2 minutes. Otherwise, we're going to miss too much of the next one that's coming along if we don't make a decision. But in those 2 minutes, we can find the beginning of a program. In Britain, you got to know what program you want to watch, because if you don't like it at 12:35 and you try to go to another channel, you're going to be in the middle of something else and be hard to follow. Production conventions is the idea that the way that media is produced is also being spread throughout the world in terms of an imperialistic way. So maybe it won't be too long before in Britain you don't find that 12:35 start time anymore, because so many American shows are exactly a half an hour long and not 35 minutes long. So there you have it, globalization. There's a lot of positives, a lot of negatives, and a lot of things that are still to be played out. Have a great day.